Testing. 1, 2, 3, testing. Hey everybody, I got one thumb up there, I think, when I did my testing. It's 5:30 by my computer. Welcome back. Let's do our triple check here. You should hear me. Can you? Thank you. You should see me. I know it's difficult, but as my daddy says, you ain't much, but you're all we got. So you should have video. That was supposed to be humor. And then the third part of our triple check, you should see a PowerPoint slide that says welcome. So if technology's working, we just passed the triple check there. I know it's been a tough couple of weeks for you. Many of you had your heart set on class last week, and Mother Nature didn't oblige us. So finally, you can your life can return to normal. That we have class. Again, you guys are not responding quickly enough. Okay, there we go. I see some. Melissa was the first to respond there, I think, to my failed attempt at humor. But again, it's been obviously some rough times for a lot of you. I know several of you in the class were babysitting students at your schools and whatever, so probably is a lot easier to be sitting in school finance class than doing that work, and that might be a good story to tell somewhere down the line to an ed leadership class about the night you had to serve as the surrogate parent for a group of middle schoolers or elementary kids or high schoolers or whatever it was. So we can thank Mother Nature for those memories for you. Let's get right to it then, everybody. Again, welcome back. Because we lost the session last week, it's kind of messed up the pacing somewhat that I had established initially. Excuse me. So I've adjusted a couple of the assignment deadlines already. We'll discuss that more toward the end of the session tonight. Normally I put out 1 or 2 sessions more on the schedule than we're actually going to need, and obviously since we lost a session last week, that kind of limits our opportunity to reduce sessions in the future. But if we're really efficient in our working, we may have another session later on we can cancel. But right now, the loss of last week's doesn't really hurt us. It just doesn't have all the pacing fall exactly the way I would have preferred. I have a pretty ambitious agenda tonight. It's some review from 2 weeks ago, some new stuff, actually some new stuff that I didn't even ask you to look at yet, but I think it's simple enough. It won't be a problem. So we have, returning again, a review of the meta values. A lot more development of the different state funding models needs to be discussed tonight. My suggestion is you get this stuff learned as quickly as possible because this is the foundation material for the course. We'll keep coming back to the meta values. We'll keep coming back to these different state funding models throughout the course. It's just better to learn it now. Each week we'll probably come back, look at it again. You'll have better understanding as we push forward and then look back. But my recommendation is after class tonight, sometime in the next couple of days, please make sure you've taken a look at all the materials posted in modules 2 and 3 that have to do with meta values and state funding models. Look those PowerPoints over, whatever I've got posted, interact with that material. It's really to your advantage just to get that taken care of, that you understand what those things are. So we have some more of that tonight. There's some content in Module 3 I haven't even asked you to look at yet, but I slipped it in to the discussion tonight because I think it's pretty simple. It's about property taxes. That's what ad valorem taxes are. I've got a short breakout schedule. I've got some time scheduled for us to discuss assignments, including the staffing allocation, which was already, I think, supposed to be due, and I extended the deadline so we'd have tonight to be able to take a look at it. You can resubmit assignments, I believe, up until the deadline and until I actually grade it. So if you've already submitted and want to submit a revised version, you can do that. But we can have time for questions at the end. So that's my agenda. It's pretty full dance card, but I'm confident we'll be able to move pretty efficiently through this. So without further ado, I recommend and suggest we dive right into it. I'm supposed to be waiting for somebody to be screaming, yes, 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 let's go, I can't wait. Hey, Kylie did there, so she was the first one. So let's take a look at this slide, which is a review, but I put it in a different format than we saw 2 weeks ago, so it may not look familiar to you. But let's look at what we have here again in terms of a review. The way a school district comes up with at least a large part of its revenue in Georgia is by deciding what its local tax rate's going to be and multiplying it by the tax digest, which is the value of the property in a given area, and that determines how much revenue you get. So let's take, okay, I'm getting the message here, nobody's seeing my next slide. Are we all saying we only see the welcome slide? Gene, are you seeing the actual slide? Welcome to technology. Okay, nobody can see it. Okay, let's see here. I just switched to another slide. Somehow that button got clicked. Let's try this. Can you now see a different slide? Thank you. Somehow I clicked the button to not have you follow. Let's try that again. Boy, I better go back for vacation time here. Who decides the tax rate in Carroll County as far as the school tax? I'll answer my own question. The Carroll County School Board. Who determines the tax digest in Carroll County where I'm sitting right now? Well, the Carroll County assessor goes all around the county and determines how much the value of the real and personal property is in Carroll County, and that becomes the Carroll County tax digest. So when the school board sets a tax rate and the assessor establishes the digest, when you multiply those two things together, that determines how much money Carroll County has to operate the local portion of its funding in the Carroll County schools, and that's the same process throughout Georgia. A big part of the revenue comes from the local property taxes, and as we looked at 2 weeks ago, one of the problems when we use a tax digest and a property tax system, all the districts are not equal in terms of their wealth. And we have an example here. District A and B are both taxing at the same rate, which is actually 20 mills, which is maybe a new concept to some of you. We're going to try to develop it a little later tonight. But the difference is District A has a tax digest of only $10,000, while District B has a tax digest 10 times that size of $100,000, and the end product in terms of revenue to support the schools, District B ends up 10 times the winner because District B has 10 times the wealth. And I could have put another column on here saying they have the same number of students. So you see that's a real problem for District A. They have the same number of students as B, but they have 1/10 of the revenue, but yet they gave the same effort. So thumbs up. You remember discussing this 2 weeks ago. And when we left 2 weeks ago, you're supposed to be nodding your head. When we left 2 weeks ago, I think everybody had a good concept in their mind as to why this creates an inequity, a problem, a challenge for all states to figure out. Because when you use a property tax and property is not equally distributed in wealth throughout the entire state, this is the situation you get: wealthier areas, poorer areas, same number of kids, an inequitable, unequal amount of revenue to support those kids. So you got to keep this in mind. This is the root of a lot of the school finance stuff. Let's move forward in another review. 2 weeks ago, we discussed the concept of the meta values as they relate to school finance. And if you will recall, we discussed the fact that liberty is a meta value that essentially manifests itself in those people who believe that local people should make local decisions, local teachers, administrators, school board members should be making decisions that affect them, not the elected legislators in Atlanta or not the federal government in Washington, D.C. Those people expressing strength or belief in this view are in effect arguing that in terms of school finance, local property taxes should be decided by local people, and what it's spent on should be decided by locally elected people and local school board. That's an example. Those are all examples of seeing liberty manifest itself in school finance policy and values. Thumbs up? Yes, yes, yes. Adequacy, as it relates to this concept of values, if someone expresses a value or a viewpoint, a frame of reference that a particular amount of school funds is not sufficient to support a certain outcome, they're expressing a concern about the adequacy of that financial decision. The Constitution of the state of Georgia says that adequacy must be demonstrated, must be met by the state of Georgia to provide a sufficient education for the children of Georgia. So adequacy is often connected to a specific outcome. So if somebody expresses a view that we're not funding schools enough for blind students to graduate from high school, they probably are articulating the value of adequacy. They are questioning whether there is sufficient funding to meet a particular determined outcome. No Child Left Behind was never funded enough to meet its lofty goals of 100% students being proficient. If somebody made that statement, they're expressing the view of the inadequacy of No Child Left Behind. Thumbs up. This is all review. Let's go over here to equality. If somebody is expressing the view that there should be equal amounts of funding for the north and the south part of Georgia, or like if you're in Fulton County, I think maybe a couple of you work in Fulton County, this always seems to be an issue in Fulton County, that North Fulton County gets more or is perceived to get more than South Fulton County. Somebody expressing concern or expressing a positive view that they think school funding should be consistent and same between North and South Fulton County. You should get the same amount of money for all kindergartners regardless of whether they're in Meriwether County or whether they're in Gordon County. This is somebody expressing the view that the value that school funding should be in consistent, same proportionality. There should be the same portion, same cut, same amount, same percentage of funding. That would be somebody expressing a value for equality in school funding. Okay? Thumbs up. I'm taking this slow because I know a lot's happened to everybody in the last 2 weeks. Let's deal with equity, which sounds like equality, but it goes way beyond equality. Equity attempts to recognize if somebody is expressing a view of equity, they are essentially identifying groups, or it could be individuals that they think, that they believe are not at the same place as other children. So for example, let's take a student with disabilities. If you look at a student with a learning disability, it's probably going to take more resources for that student with a learning disability to overcome that disability to have the same chance for success as a general education student who does not possess the learning disability. So in a school funding framework, somebody expressing a view for equity is asking for unequal treatment of unequals. So first you have to determine who the unequals are: rich kids versus poor kids, black kids versus white kids, North Georgia, South Georgia. Some some perceived inequality. Title I students, non-Title I students, some perceived inequality. So you identify an inequality, they're at a different place, they're not at the same place, then your funding represents an acknowledgement that they're not at the same place. So you provide additional funding for the individual or group of individuals that are perceived to be at the position of disadvantage. So I would argue Title I funding is an effort at providing equity, trying to level the playing field, you may hear it referred to that way, for poor kids or kids who are at risk of not being successful in school. So let's provide additional resources in an effort at making it more equitable so that the poorer student or the student perceived to be behind has a better chance. We good on these? Let's see if we're good on these. Here are four checking for understandings. Your answer choices are here at the top: liberty, adequacy, equity, equality. Take a look at all four, and then we'll go through them one by one. I'll be quiet. See if you can figure out the answers to these four, please. Okay, let's look at the first one. I hope I gave you enough time to look at them. Let's also acknowledge that it's possible there could be one answer, more than one answer that would be a correct answer, but I do think there's probably a best answer. Let's look at one. Go ahead and type what you think the answer to one is, please. I don't know if we're funding schools enough to increase the graduation rate. Well, we got copycats in here. We all agree on adequacy. I'm with you on that. I think this one would be best answered as adequacy because it is tied to the outcome here of the graduation rate. Very good. Very good. Let's look at number two. Go ahead and type what you think the best answer to the reality is that disadvantaged students need more funding to equal things up, even things up. I agree again with our equity answer. If we would have tied this to a specific outcome, it probably would have been more technically sound to answer adequacy, but I agree this is what equity is. Let's look at number three. No Child Left Behind was never funded enough to meet its goals. What would we answer for number three? I buy the adequacy argument on this. Again, the person is saying funding is insufficient to meet a certain outcome, therefore it's inadequate. That would be somebody expressing adequacy. I agree with that. And then number four, it only makes sense for local teachers, community members to control their school. That's a liberty value for sure. So hopefully it's all come back to you from 2 weeks with a little bit of review here and a little bit of practice. Can we move forward? Are there questions or comments on these? Move forward? I'm seeing lots of thumbs up, so I'm moving forward. This is critical, okay? And sometimes students have difficulty with this concept. So again, this is what I'm saying as I started class tonight. I strongly urge you to take a look at all the materials I've posted about these different state funding models. Some students find this a little bit more abstract and challenging. So we started this 2 weeks ago, didn't get into this in very much detail. Some of the detail is going to come right now. I think it's going to require some additional reinforcement for some of you to really understand it. So let's try this again. I think we had a similar chart 2 weeks ago. If you think of this as a continuum, let me switch to a line here if I can get this to work for me. if you think about this more as a continuum kind of from left to right, it really kind of interestingly follows somewhat that the left side of this document is more of the earlier forms of school funding, and some of the areas on the right have been more recent, because it kind of follows the timeline too of left to right. But as we said 2 weeks ago, most states have chosen some model that's somewhere in between. Now, let me throw you for one loop. Let's go back again. Why do we have differences in the different states? One of the big reasons why we have differences is each state decides on its own how it wants to handle this situation of property taxes and the wealthy and the non-wealthy. So we don't have one cookie-cutter approach for this, because every state does this in a way that they think is fair, or in a way that ascribes to their values, or is in a way that they can afford to do it. So as we look again back at these different models, recognize that these are being influenced by the previous slide I just showed and how it's perceived to be a fair way to deal with the rich and the poor in terms of property taxes. No state funding, though, right here, let me get my clicker going. No state funding is exactly that. Back in the olden times, there was no state funding. The only funding came from local sources. We don't have any state in the country anymore that fails to fund education. Every state does some funding. So this is not really an option anymore. A flat grant is one of the earlier forms of state funding in which money was appropriated by a state's General Assembly. Let's say they appropriated $1 million. And if they have 1 million kids in that state, it's a matter of simple division. You got $1 million, you got 1 million kids, guess how many dollars you get for every kid? $1. It's a simple mathematical calculation. No factors are considered like who's special ed and who's not, who's rich and who's poor and who's not, whether they're an EIP student. None of that is considered in a flat grant. It's simply a sterile mathematical calculation that you take a hunk of money and you divide it up in some mathematical way without any effort at thinking about equity or differences in kids or differences in need. North Carolina still has a portion of its funding program that's given to its districts in a flat grant. Everybody in the state of North Carolina gets a hunk of money just based upon what's their student count numbers. Now, that's not all of their funding program in North Carolina, but some of it is still flat granted, to give you an example. So before I go any further, let's look at these down here. More liberty, less equity, less state involvement. So if you think about no state funding and you think about flat grants, I hope you see why I said there's more liberty in this, there's less equity, and there's less state involvement. The state's not doing much in these two things. They're doing nothing in the first one, and all they're doing in the second one is just giving a flat hunk of money to the school district. So that's why I have these items on the left side. They really certainly pertain to these two. Let me stop. Are we good so far? This is really important to have your good attention on this, and let's get this, for most of you, with taking 1 or 2 bites out of the apple. I think North Carolina might be the only state that still uses a lot of flat grants, although there are certain programs where certain funds for certain purposes in a state might be given in terms of a flat grant, but not their large grants. But let me give a bad example. You might have money that's available for English language learners, so a state might give that to its districts as a flat grant. North Carolina still gives a flat grant to their general funding program, a big hunk of their money, not just like their ELL money, but their general support money. A lot of it is still flat granted. Let's take where Georgia is, and I think somewhere around 35 or so states are what we would call a foundation program. It's in the middle of the continuum because it's just that. It has some of the same values you see on the left side, but also some you see on the right side. What we have in the foundation is the state has some involvement. It's kind of a compromise between less state involvement and more state involvement. It's not as much involvement as you get on these two, but it's more than you get in these two. And what we have in Georgia, the state has set a certain foundation amount. They've pegged a point, and they've promised that no matter how poor you are, they're going to bring you up to that foundation point. We still have local school boards in Georgia. We still have liberty in Georgia. The local school boards are setting the tax rate. We still have the local school boards that get to decide how to spend the local portion of that money. So we still have some liberty, but we lose some liberty with this because we have the state being more involved, and the state is taking state funds, and they are providing state funds by guaranteeing a foundation to a certain amount. In Georgia, the foundation amount is set at the 75th percentile. I'm not wanting to confuse anybody with all the details yet, but the richest 25% of the districts in Georgia get no state foundation equalization funding money, and the poorest 75% get some state money. So what you have in the foundation program is the state arbitrarily picked a spot and said, we'll guarantee you to this amount. If you're above that spot, you get nothing from the state, and if you're below, nothing extra from the state. You still get your basic funding, but if you're below that point, you get a proportionate amount of money from the state to bring you up to that point. So this is what we have. A foundation amount is established. State money is brought into the picture to bring everybody up to that foundation amount. Let me contrast that. I know I'm talking too much, but you're all scholars here. Let me contrast that with the power equalizing system, which we see a few states have a system that looks more like this, and this is very similar to the foundation with one exception. The foundation amount in power equalizing, I'm sorry I'm throwing all these terms at you you've never heard before, but in the power equalizing, we're talking about the state guaranteeing much more money. This is something like the 100th percentile in a power equalization. Remember we said Georgia was guaranteeing to the 75th. Some states are doing more for the poorer districts. They're guaranteeing that poor district way down here at the bottom. Georgia's taking them up to the 75th district. But in some states, that poor district down here at the bottom is being taken up clear to the high, wealthiest district in that state. Rabun County is one of the wealthiest districts in Georgia. I'll just use that for an example. So if Georgia had power equalization, it would be guaranteeing Pelham City, which is the poorest system in the state of Georgia. The state would be guaranteeing to Pelham, we know you're clear down here in the bottom. Here's poor Pelham down here, and we have Rabun up here. Rabun can raise a lot more money because they have a lot higher tax digest. If we were power equalizing, we would be guaranteeing that poor old Pelham would get brought clear up to be able to get the same amount of money from their property taxes per student as Rabun County can get. And that's not what Georgia has done. Georgia has set the number down here at the 75th percentile and is not providing as much equity as a power equalizing state is. So what I'm trying to show you is power equalizing is really the same thing, except it's more equity, setting the bar at a higher level that the state is actually going to give more money to the local systems. But the catch is the locals are giving up more of their authority. That in order to get that state money, the state always puts a lot of restrictions on that. So if you want the money, you got to do a bunch of things to get it. In Georgia, you don't have to do as much to get the money, but you get less money. I see a question, and I'll pause here. I I see a question from Elizabeth. What's an example of a power equalizing state? There are some more progressive states politically. I would say like again, I don't want to start naming a bunch of states because I'm only generally have the right answer. Maybe some more of our northeastern states, like Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, states that generally are much higher tax states, have a much more involved, larger government. Liberty's probably less influential in those states right now than equity is. So some of the northeastern states probably are providing a lot more funds closer to this kind of a model than Georgia is. Georgia's really a smack dab right in the middle. Some of the requirements, Jennifer asked a question, you have to tax at a certain level. For example, they may require them to tax at 20 mils. So they would say, in order for you to get any of the state money or any of this extra state money, you have to tax yourself at a higher rate. So really, they've taken the decision essentially away from the local school boards, at least in part, because they're dangling this carrot of extra state money, but only if you meet that requirement. Or some of the other requirements are that you have to spend it on certain things. You don't get to decide what to spend it on. Some of the funds might be specifically targeted for, I'm just making this up, but they may say these funds can only be used for students with disabilities. So even if you really need the money somewhere else, you can't get it because it comes with a lot of strings. Just like think about our example of Title I. I mean, Title I has a whole lot of restrictions on what it can be spent or not spent for. This is a similar kind of example of the kind of restrictions you might see from a state that's willing to give extra money to their districts, but it just comes with more restrictions. Let me finish my last comment, then I'll go back and see if I missed your comments, because I'm sure I have, and then I have got some checking for understanding for us. But the last model is exactly what you would think it is, full state funding. In a sense, there are no local property taxes being decided by local school boards. The state has taken that decision away from the locals. This really is no liberty because there is no local control. Hawaii, Vermont, and Washington State, Hawaii is our clearest example. Those other two states, Vermont and Washington State, are approaching this kind of a system where really the state makes all the decisions about school funding. They've taken it away from the locals. That clearly is equity because the state can completely wipe out the differences between the rich and the poor, but also it's clearly less liberty, and it's clearly the state's in control. So if we had this in Georgia, we wouldn't have school boards with the authority to adopt local property taxes. That would have been taken away by the Georgia General Assembly. All the tax dollars would have been collected by the Georgia General Assembly at the state level, and then the state would have decided and would decide how to appropriate those funds back out to our local systems. We wouldn't have the local taxes, we wouldn't have the liberty, but that would be a perfectly equitable situation in terms of the state could make all those decisions of equity across the boundaries for the entire state. That would be the most equitable system, arguably, but the least liberty in the system. So let me clear my page here and go back. I know I've missed perhaps some comments. You're welcome to make additional comments. We're not done looking at this yet. I've got 2 more slides, but that is the starting point for this. Let's see. I'm going back to see. Okay. Oh, well, you did see something from North Carolina about a flat grant, and I really don't know why they hold on to that. They get criticized in every school finance class across the United States, uses North Carolina as an example of a flat grant because it's really like the only one that's left in a large scale. Well, Well, I think I've responded to anything that was actually questions. The rest look like good comments. Let me push us back to this. Here, I think, is the place where some students can't make the distinction. So I'm trying, again, with another slide here. In a foundation, you've got liberty and equity. And let's think about Georgia in this. The liberty is we have 185 school systems in Georgia, I believe. We have 185 elected school boards elected by the men and women that live in that area. And that school board has the ability to levy property taxes on the people that live there to support schools. So I would argue that's an example of liberty that we have in this foundation system. Our system allows liberty to continue. And you can decide in Georgia if you want to take the extra foundation money that comes with the equity part of this. Remember I said Georgia promises. They use the 75th percentile. We'll be talking about this again next week. But they use a certain foundation number, and they've promised to bring everybody up to that point. So that is some equity. They are recognizing that we have poor parts of the state that need help from the state as a whole. So the criticisms might be it's not funding enough, it's not being funded enough, it's not bringing it up to a high enough level. Certainly we can say those criticisms are valid, but from a conceptual standpoint, just keep in your mind, we've got a system in Georgia that allows both local decisions and liberty, and the state provides a basic amount of funding to everybody, and the state goes beyond that. It provides equity funding to the poorest 75 percentile districts in the state of Georgia, and I think that leaves about 145 districts or something like that that actually get extra equity money because they're poor. If you're in Cobb County, if you are in Fulton County, you don't get any of that money because you're in the upper echelon of rich districts in the state, but 75% of the districts get some of this equity money that comes about from this established foundation dollar amount. Let's conceptually contrast that with the power equalization model where the state puts more requirements to earn the state money generally, and they establish the foundation at the top. So this really tells us what it is. This makes the power of all of the districts in the state equal because the state promises to bring everybody up to this. Now, obviously, this is a lot more expensive than what Georgia is doing, and that's probably part of the reason why Georgia's using the 75th percentile. Georgia would say we can't afford to do power equalizing. And Georgia, I think, is a state where we would argue there's probably liberty is a strong value of a lot of people in Georgia. And let me be honest about it. School boards don't want their authority to go away. School boards don't want this if it means they're going to lose some of their authority or some of their liberty. We have the Georgia School Boards Association that always fights every year to maintain the ability of local school boards in Georgia to tax and to make their own decisions about what to do with that portion of the money. I don't know about you. This is my last comment on this. I don't know about you. I'm not sure I would be willing to have all of our state tax dollars go to Atlanta and then trust our legislators in Atlanta to divvy those funds up in a way that we all are happy with. So I'm not sure we love the system we have now, but I can certainly think of some scenarios that I think would potentially be a little more frightening to educators in the state. I'm not sure, well, I know what I think, but it doesn't matter what I think. What's important for you right now is to really try to think about getting the differences between these two, which are probably oftentimes the most confusing to students. So let's do a checking for understanding here. Let's try this. This might be a little difficult first time through. Let me say, first acknowledge that there may be more than one answer that would be acceptable to these, but let's try this. We've got our answer choices here at the top. No state funding, flag grant, foundation, power equalizing, full state funding. Here's 5 examples. Take a couple of minutes, look at them all, think what you think the best answer is. We'll come back to the first one then. Again, let me say there may very well be more than one acceptable answer to these. Okay, let's start at the bottom. Let's start with number 5. What do we think the answer is? Go ahead and type what you think the answer is. I would agree with those of you that said full state funding. Now we have to talk about these more and think about them more and read about them more, and then eventually you see that. But in full state funding, essentially what has happened in Hawaii, and we'll use that for an example because that's the best example. In Hawaii, there are no local school district school boards. There is no local property tax to support schools. There is no local decision-making with respect to school financing in Hawaii. All of the school funding is controlled by the state legislature in Honolulu. So there is absolutely no liberty in a full state funding system as I described it in Hawaii. Now, there would probably be not that much liberty probably either in power equalization, so I know some of you might have been tempted to answer that, and the foundation system also puts a little bit of restriction on liberty, but the best answer in terms of least liberty, I would argue, is full state funding. What do we think about number 4 here? Very little equity. What do we have for an answer to number 4? I'm with you all. It's got to be one of the two on the left-hand side of the continuum, right? It's got to be either no state or flat grant. There's no equity in either one of those. Now, you could probably, I may be tricking you with this, you probably could have answered foundation because there is some equity in foundation, but maybe not as much as people think there ought to be. But your best answers are your no state and flat grant. I'm with you on that. I agree with you. Let's take a look at 3. State takes action, reduces the gap between the rich and the poor. I'm with you on this. This is one I said reduces the gap. Now, if I would have said eliminates the gap, your answers would have had to have been power equalizing or full state funding because there is no gap in those. But I did say reduce, which I guess I was implying that maybe foundation would be your best answer to that because that's what a foundation program does. It does reduce the gap, but you could argue power equalization also is reducing the gap. It actually is eliminating it. And full state funding is reducing the gap, but it's also eliminating it. So play on words here. Foundation might be your best answer, but power equalization and full state funding are not wrong because they do reduce the gap. How about number 2? Let me clear the page. 2, state eliminates the gap. I think we just answered that, right? That needs to be your power equalization or your full state funding, okay? And then let's look at number 1. state action ensures there's some equity in the formula. This is another one that might be tricky based on my actual words here. Number one, let's talk about what it can't be. There's no equity in which to. There's no equity in no state funding, and there's no equity in flat grants. So we know it can't be those two. I was thinking foundation again. I'm not trying to be cute with words here, but there is some equity in foundation. I would use a stronger word for power equalization and full state funding. Okay, let's see what we're doing here. Let's not lose the forest for the trees. What are we trying to do? Let me go back and then. We're looking at how this issue is dealt with. And it's dealt with in unique ways, in unique states. But again, the problem is you've got equal effort and you don't get equal results. So this typically calls for some kind of a response by the state as a whole. Meriwether County can't fix this on its own because it doesn't have the means to. Jenkins County can't fix this on its own. It doesn't have the means to. This requires a response from the state as a whole. And that's why we have this different chart that details the different ways in which states have responded to this challenge. This is, I think, can be viewed as a continuum. Some states might be in between these models, and they are hard to classify. So if you think of all 50 states, we'd have 50 check marks somewhere along this continuum. Georgia is smack dab in the middle. I think it's a compromise kind of system where we can see some liberty and some equity. You might argue it's too much liberty and not enough equity, or vice versa. And we have other states who move further along the line here. But the point is, again, one more time, and then I'll put a sock in my mouth. The point is, this requires a response from the state. This cannot be addressed individually by districts. So just think about it, and then Pammy typed something earlier. Think about Georgia, and everybody in this class is from Georgia, so I can limit my conversation to Georgia. But think about this state, and when you drive around this state, where do the people live? What are the developed parts of the state? What are the undeveloped parts of the state? Where is the wealth in this state? Where are the poorer parts of the state? To think about coming up with a political process where we elect men and women that come together in Atlanta to figure out a solution that works well for all of the state. This is a very diverse state in terms of geography, development, where people live, the underdeveloped, the developed parts of the state. This is a very, very challenging proposition for this state to come up with a system that's fair, that all parts of the state can accept, that seems fair. This is a real challenge. Every state has this challenge, but some states are a lot more homogeneous. They're not as large as Georgia. They're not as different as the different parts of Georgia are. So do you think Fulton County wants to pay more taxes or give up more of their funds so that Jenkins County can benefit from that? I mean, this is a very difficult issue to deal with as a state, and depending on where you work and where you live, you probably have your own view about what's fair of that. Cobb County probably thinks it's fair that they get to tax local property in a county that's got several $billion worth of wealth. Or Fulton County probably thinks the same thing, whereas a Jenkins County or a Pelham City that has very little to tax doesn't like this system. Let me try one more thing. I'm going beyond where I should go tonight, so your indulgence is appreciated. If you were living and working in Fulton County, Fulton's one of the rich ones if you didn't know, if you were living in Fulton County, would you be in favor of full state funding or power equalizing if you were living and working in Fulton County? Would you be in favor of that? I'm testing your understanding here. I've got some yeses and some nos here. Is Fulton County a have or a have not? I mean, they're a have in this system. So if we were going to power equalize, or for the state to take over funding, where do you think the state's going to get those funds to equalize and to full state fund? They're going to get those from the haves. In this case, the example we gave, they're going to get the money from Fulton. So if you remember your literature class when you were in middle school or whenever we read Robin Hood, if we still read Robin Hood, this is like Robin Hood. The state would be robbing from the rich, in this example Fulton County, and redistributing it to the poorer parts of the state. That's exactly what would be the effect of power equalizing or full state funding. And the governor doesn't have a money tree, so he's going to get the money from somewhere. He's going to get it from Cobb County. He's going to get it from Fulton County. Gwinnett County, I'm going to pick on Pammy here for a minute. Gwinnett County is actually one of the poor counties. Gwinnett County gets extra state funds because they're in the lower 75th percentile. I knew that would blow your mind. Cobb doesn't get any money. Fulton doesn't get any money. DeKalb doesn't get any money, but Gwinnett gets extra state funding for being poor. So, all right, I think enough has been said for tonight on this topic. So my admonition again to you is I've got some materials posted in modules 2 and 3. Now that we've discussed this more extensively tonight and a little bit 2 weeks ago, take some time, look at it again. We're going to take another look at this next week, but hopefully that'll be quickly in the form of a review. But it is important to get these basics down about that really accounts for the differences in terms of why we have state funding looking so differently in different states. I really appreciate your engagement on this. I'm going to be really naughty right now, and I'm going to stick in some new content that I think we can do very quickly. This is in Module 3, and then we're going to do our breakout. This is in Module 3, but I'm sneaking this in because I think this is very easy to understand. I didn't even ask you to look at this, but it is posted in Module 3. But good, Melissa, very good. Ad valorem means according to value, and that's property taxes are based theoretically on the value of that property, and we're going to use Georgia as an example. This is done differently in all of the 50 states, but since everybody in this class is in Georgia, I can use Georgia as an example and I don't have to give other examples necessarily. This is our discussion on property taxes that hopefully makes sense because we've been doing all this talk indirectly about property taxes. We have in Georgia an ad valorem tax. If you own any real property, that would be land, buildings, like a house, land itself, it's taxed. And if you own personal property, like cars, boats, machinery, businesses get taxed on their inventory. The Georgia Department of Revenue has a book that has hundreds of items in it that are subjected to the Georgia personal property tax. I don't even know everything that you have to pay a personal property tax on in Georgia, but if you own property, you got to pay these property taxes. And in Georgia, a city can do that, an incorporated city, a county, and schools have the authority to levy or place ad valorem taxes on real and personal property. If you live in a city, you're paying more taxes than those of us who live in an unincorporated area of a county because you're getting the city taxes, you're getting the county taxes, and you're getting the school taxes. I live in an unincorporated area of Douglas County, so I'm paying only Douglas County tax and Douglas County schools tax. I'm not paying Douglasville taxes because I don't live in Douglasville and I don't get any of the services of Douglasville. So some of you are getting a property tax bill from 3 sources And some of you are getting a property tax bill from only 2 entities. Moving along, you can stop me anywhere here and make comments. In Georgia, don't ask me why we do this, but in Georgia, you pay taxes only on 40% value, the fair market value. So if you bought a car in a fair market today, and that car was sold to you for $10,000, here's your first math question for the class. Don't anybody have a heart attack? Here's a math question. Recalling again that you pay taxes only on 40% of the fair market value, in this case of the car, of the $10,000 fair market value car. What is the tax bill for that car based on what dollar amount of the value of the car? I'm asking for a number here. There's a calculation. Yay, Dawn was first. Jennifer second. You're only paying taxes on the tax bill is based on $4,000, not on the $10,000 full fair market value of the car. So that's how we do it in Georgia. Don't ask me why we do it that way. I don't know why. We had a student in the class last semester from Maryland. Maryland uses an 80% fair market value number. Every state can do this however they want to do it. We use 40%. Let me keep going. Again, I think this is starting to maybe get a little murkier. In Georgia, we use a system called mills. Instead of just taxing you a certain percentage, we use a system that's based on mills. There's a lot of historical precedent for this. Many states use mills. This comes out of the history of how property taxes were done in the United States. But if you can remember this, you can figure this out. 1 mil is $1 per thousand. So it's 1/10 of 1% actually in percentages. But 1 mil is, as the government, the schools are asking you to pay $1 per $1,000 of value of that property. Or in the decimal sense, it's actually 0.001. 0.001, and again, I'm sorry, somebody's freaking out now with math, but 0.001 is actually 1/10 of 1%, or $1 per thousand, if you want to put it in a dollar amount. In Georgia, unless the voters have approved additional, or they were somehow grandfathered in at some point, there's a limit of 20 mils for schools. So school boards can tax $20 to its people. They can put a tax of up to $20 for every $1,000 worth of property that somebody owns in their school system. Many districts are at the 20 mil limit. A lot of our downstate districts are at a lot lower amounts than 20 mils. So let's try to follow that up with some more examples. So 1 mil is a decimal, it's 0.001, and it means $1 per thousand. 5 mils would be, you're being taxed $5 per thousand, and the decimal for that would be 0.005. Again, that's 5/10 of a percent. 20 mils is $20 per thousand, and on and on. So don't get freaked out on numbers here. It always happens when I throw numbers out here. But 20 mils is simply this. The school board's saying, you got to get in your wallet and give us $20 for every $1,000 of property that you own. 10 mils is you get in your wallet and you give $10 per $1,000 of everything you've got. Still good? Again, I know I'm throwing too much at you. Justin has a question, so I'll pause to answer it. The districts downstate are generally poorer. When you tax poor people's property, that really hurts them. Poor people maybe don't even really own that property. The bank probably owns it. They probably owe a lot of money on that property. So there's a lot of sensitivity to the tax rate downstate for people who generally are very poor, trying to live as farmers, They have a lot of acreage that they have to pay taxes on, but they really don't own it. The bank probably owns it because they're paying a huge mortgage note on that. So there's just a general tendency in the poorer parts of Georgia and the more rural parts of Georgia don't tax as much. And school board members oftentimes get elected promising to keep the tax rates low because the people flat out cannot afford to pay high taxes. So it's a difficult conundrum. The poorer districts are not taking advantage of their own ability to raise more revenue locally because there's so many political and practical pressures as to why they don't want to do that. It really hurts their people. Pammy F. says the highest mill rate in Georgia. I think actually Rockdale in county might be the highest, but DeKalb, in the PowerPoint that I've provided you guys, I think DeKalb was the highest at almost 24 mills. Melissa's question here. So if you live in Atlanta, you could be paying taxes in DeKalb and in Fulton. No. Well, you'd be paying taxes wherever you live and not both. You'd only be paying one set of property taxes, whether it's DeKalb or Fulton. But Atlanta Public Schools goes into both DeKalb and Fulton County. So some people living in DeKalb are paying Atlanta Public Schools taxes instead of DeKalb County schools. I know this is fuzzy, and this might make it fuzzier, but I'm going to go there anyway because we got all these Einsteins in the room here. I'm going to go here with an example. Because Pammy set it up saying she'd look at her tax bill more closely. You all can look at your tags in your glove box of your car to check this one out. So, I'm hearing the angst all over Georgia here. We have numbers here and a calculation. You can handle this. Don't panic. I only had 2 years of high school math and I'm teaching the class, so you can handle this. Here's the example. All you rich teachers out there in this class and rich administrators, when you go tomorrow to buy your Lexus, I was waiting for somebody to respond to that comment, laughing about being a rich teacher or a rich administrator. Nobody's laughing at that. That was a joke, guys. Hello? When you buy your Lexus tomorrow for a fair market value of $100,000, okay? The car cost you $100,000. Remember that you don't pay taxes on the full value. You pay taxes only on the 40% value, and I'm giving you the fact that the millage rate is $32, that the local taxes equal 32 mills, which means you have to pay $32 for every $1,000 of value of that Lexus. So this is a very simple calculation because all we need to do is take the rate times the value, and that will tell us what our tax bill should be. So in this example, we convert to the 40% value, and then we convert the mills to dollars and multiply. And here's what it would look like. You take the $100,000 Lexus, 40% value would be $40,000, right? And you multiply that by the 32 mills, and to convert the mills to dollars, because remember this is $32 per thousand, if you simply take the decimal point that really is here, and I'm not showing it there, but move it 1, 2, 3 places to the left, you're going from thousands to hundreds to actual dollars, you'll come up with 0.032, and that's the same thing as 32 mils. It's just converting it to a dollar amount. This is per thousand. This is per dollar. So if I take 40,000 times 32 mils, your car tags would be $1,280. Again, I know many of you are having a heart attack right now, and your eyes are glossing over, but I think as school leaders and school officials recommending to the community to support education and wanting the community to support education, I think we ought to understand how this works and what we're really asking people to pay when we're asking people to pay this. So this is how it's done. We'll do more of this. I threw it at you unfairly tonight without giving you a chance to think about it in advance, and Amanda has a good question already. What about the law that came into effect last year? You're exactly right. In the future, I need to change this example because car tags are going to be using a different system because the Georgia General Assembly wanted to get car tags out of this ad valorem tax because they think it's unfair to poorer people, I guess. And so you have a title tax now. You'll pay a one-time, a much larger amount when you buy a car in the future in Georgia, and you will not be paying the ad valorem tax on car tags for future purchases anymore. So you're exactly right, Amanda. I did the same thing. I bought a new car, and I had to decide whether I wanted to continue to pay the ad valorem tax, whether I wanted to pay a one-time title tag, and I paid the one-time fee, and I won't be paying ad valorem tax on that car ever again. But we will be looking at this once again, but I had to try one more time here to give you a checking for understanding. Let's look at these and see if we got anything out of this unfairness I threw at you here for the last 15 minutes. And then I will be done talking. You can say hooray, hooray. What would be, let's see if we can figure these out. What would be the taxable amount of a fair market value of a $100,000 home? Justin was quick on the draw on that, and I agree. Again, all we're doing in that is showing that we understand that you're paying taxes on the 40% value. This decimal of 0.010 is actually how many mils. That simply is 10 mils, which what this practically means is the school board is asking people to pay $10 per $1,000 of value of their real and personal property, pay $10 toward the schools. Which of these would not be taxed? A car, a house, a business inventory, a school finance textbook. The textbook would actually be taxed with a sales tax. Exactly, Elizabeth, thank you. But it wouldn't be part of the property tax. But a car, a house, a business inventory, those are all considered property that's taxed. And then to calculate this last one, you don't need a calculator. If you understand the relationship of these items, it's already reduced to the 40% value. See that? It's the 40% value already. It's not the fair market value. It's the 40% value, so it's already been reduced down to 1,000. What's the answer here? What's the tax bill? 10 mils means what? $10 per 1,000. Uh-oh. We got more work to do on this. What does 10 mils mean? It means you're being asked to pay $10 per $1,000 of value. The car is worth $1,000. You don't need to do any calculations. The tax bill is $10. I know you hate math. I hate math. Our interest is making sure we understand these relationships. You ought to be able to go to the gas station or talk to your neighbor and they say, oh, school's wasting all this money. Are you asking for another tax increase in your county? We ought to be able to be learned enough in this topic that we can educate the 99% of Georgians who don't have any clue about how this works. Those of us working in education, I think, have a responsibility to have a good conceptual understanding of this. We will take another bite out of this apple again in the future, a couple more times. So I apologize for throwing that on you, but I'm confident you're not going to have too much cognitive dissonance with that. Can we move forward? Let's get